Hi everyone, my name is Marshall Nguyen and I'm a senior student at Mitchell State University. For today, I will discuss about a topic which is the incident response process for the class CYBR 442. And let's jump right into it. For today's topic, I will discuss about the incident response process and how to handle such an incident and the post activities should be performed after an incident took place. First, we're going to go into the incident response process. There are many industry standards, recommendations, and best practices that can help you to create your own incident response. You can still use those as a reference to make sure that you cover all the relevant phases for your type of business. The one we are doing today is going to be the Computer Security Incident Response, CSIR publication 800612 from NIST. Regardless of the one you select to use as a reference, make sure to adapt it to your own business requirements. Most of the time in security, the concept of one size fits all doesn't apply at all. The intent is always to leverage the well-known standards and best practices and then apply them to your own context. And you should also be flexible as well. Why do we need an incident response process in place? Here I have the figure, which is the event timeline leading to the escalation and the beginning of the incident response process. First thing, everything was working normally until one day a user opens a suspicious email, but then later on he found out that the content of the email is irrelevant to what he's doing for the day, and there could be some funky email, something doesn't look harm at all in the first place. And then after you open the suspicious email, the sensors do not detect anything. And later on, moving on, the user trying to authenticate from his mobile device, the report that he is unable to authenticate, because he using his own mobile device and connect into the corporate network. Later on, the help desk starts troubleshooting the issue that because he is unable to authenticate from his mobile device. Since there are indications of the compromise, a security incident was created, and then the show goes on because after that incident response continues from here. And for on the event timeline, there are 7 steps, and with the description for each steps we should do. For the first one is why the diagram says that the system is working properly. It is important to learn from this event that, what is considered to be normal. Do you have the baseline that it can give you evidence that the system was running properly, and are you sure that there is no evidence of compromise before the email? And after the user open the suspicious email, we have, for step 2, we know that the phishing emails are still one of the most common methods used by the cyber criminals to entice users to click on the link that leads to a malicious or compromised site. For the consideration, while technical security controls must be in place to detect and filter these types of attacks, the users must be taught how to identify a phishing email. And then later on, the sensors do not detect anything. Many of the traditional sensors, which is the IDS system or the IPS system, used nowadays are not able to identify infiltration and lateral movement by phishing attacks. And to enhance your security posture, you will need to improve your technical security controls and then reduce the gap between the infection and detection. For step 4, there's already a part of the collateral damage done by this attack because we can see that the user is not able to authenticate from his mobile device. The credentials were compromised and the user was having trouble authenticating himself by using his mobile device. This sometimes happens because the attackers already changed the user's password. There should be a technical security controls in place that enable IT to reset the user's password at the same time enforcing the multi-factor authentication. For the step 5, the help desk starts troubleshooting the issue is that because not every single incident is security related. It is important to the help desk that to perform the initial troubleshooting to isolate the issue. For the step 6, at this point in time, the help desk is doing what it's supposed to do, and the collecting evidence that the system was compromised and escalating the issue. The help desk should obtain as much information as possible about its suspicious activity to justify the reason why they believe that there is a security related incident. For the step 7, at this point, the incident response process takes over and follows its own path, which may vary according to the company, industry, segment, and standards. It is important to document every single step of the process, and after the incident is resolved, incorporate the lessons learned with the aim of enhancing the overall security panel. While there's much room for the improvement in the scenario, there is sometimes something that exists in this fictional company that many other companies around the world are missing, which is the incident response itself. Because the companies that have a good security posture would have an incident response process in place, and they would also ensure that the following guidelines, which is all IT personnel should be trained to know how to handle security incident, and all users should be trained to know the core fundamentals about security in order to perform their jobs more safely, which is help avoid getting infected. There should be the integration between the help desk system and then the incident response team for data sharing in the future. The scenario would have some variations that could totally change the outcome, which is they are the indications of compromise, the IOC, and then the indications of attack, which is the IOA. For the indications of compromise, they are pieces of data found in the system block entries of files that identify the potentially malicious activity on the system or network. For example, we have the unusual outbound or inbound of network traffic. We have unknown files, applications, and processes in the system, and unexplained activity by privileged and user accounts. For the indication of attack, we have which is they are the indications that demonstrate the intentions behind a cyber attack and the techniques used by the threat actor to accomplish their objectives. For example, the public servers communicating with the internal host or the connections via non-standard ports rather than the port 80 or port 443. And after we identify that we have the indication of compromise or attacks, we're then moving on to create an incident response process, which is now we're going to discuss about it. Although the incident response process will vary according by the company and its needs, there are some fundamental aspects of it that will be the same across all the industries. The first step is to create an incident response process. The first step is to establish the objective, which is in other words, to answer the question, what is the purpose of this process? This might look really redundant as the name seems to be self-explanatory. It is important that you are very clear to the purpose of the process so that everyone is aware of what this process is trying to accomplish. And once you have identified the objective, then you will need to work on the scope. Again, you start this by answering questions, which is the first one in this case is, to whom does this process apply to? Although the incident process usually has a company-wide scope, which is it can also have a departmental scope in some scenarios. For this reason, it is important that you define whether this is a company-wide process or not. Each company may have a different perception of a security incident. Therefore, it is imperative that you have Definition of what constitutes a security incident, and with examples for the reference. Along with the definitions, companies must also create their glossary, which is their terminology with the fully detailed definitions of the terminology used. Different industries have different sets of terminologies, and if these terminologies are relevant to the security incident, they must be documented. Moving on, we have in an incident response process, the roles and responsibilities are critical. Without the proper level of authority, the entire process is at risk. The importance of the level of authority in an incident response is evident that when you consider the question, who has the authority to confiscate a computer in order to perform further investigation? Defining users or groups that have this level of authority, you are ensuring that the entire company is aware of this, and if an incident occurs in the future, they will not question the group that is enforcing the policy. And another important question to answer is regarding the severity of an incident. What defines a critical incident, and how are you going to distribute your manpower when an incident occurs? And should you allocate your more resources to incident A or to incident B? Why? Because there are only some examples of questions that should be answered in order to define the priorities and severity level of the incident. To identify the severity level, you need to take into considerations of the following aspect of a business, which is first one is the functional impact of the incident on the business, the type of information affected by the incident, and lastly, the recoverability of the business after the incident took place. Moving on now that we have the fundamental cover, you need to put the incident response team together. Now is where all things need to be done in order to perform, the action of gathering a team, because we need to perform a lot of hiring process, background check, or the security clearance, depends on which industry your company is in. The format of the team will vary according to the company size, budget, and purpose. A large company may want to use a distributed model, which is having multiple incident response teams for the multiple incidents cases. This model can be very useful for organizations that have multiple locations or branches in different areas. Meanwhile, for the smaller companies, they might want to use the centralized. They might want to centralize the entire incident response team into one entity, which is after choosing the model, the company will start recruiting employees to be part of the team. The incident response process requires personnel with technical broad knowledge, while also requiring extremely deep knowledge in some other areas. The challenge is to find people with depth and breadth in this field, and which sometimes can lead to the conclusion that you might need to hire external people to fill some positions in the team, or even outsource the incident response team to a different company. The budget of the team must also cover the continuously improvement via education and the acquisition of the proper tools and software and hardware. But also, if you realize that if you're planning to outsource the incident response operations, make sure that you have a well-defined service level agreement, SLA, that will meet all the severity levels that were established previously. So during this phase, you will need to define the team coverage, the assuming you need the 24 hours operation. For example, for the shifts, how many shifts will be necessary for 24-hour coverage? And for the team allocation, based on these shifts, who is going to work on each shift, including the full-time employees, or are there any contractors available at the time? And also, we need to think about the on-call process. It is recommended that you have an on-call rotation for technical and management roles in case the issue needs to be escalated. Now, after we're putting the team together, we need to think about the incident life cycle. Every incident must start in the beginning must have an end. Otherwise, this incident would be a tremendous nightmare to everyone. And what happens in between the beginning and the end are different phases that will determine the outcome of the response process. This is an ongoing process we call the incident life cycle. What we have described until now can be considered the preparation phase, which is we identify if we need an incident response process or not, and then we put together a team by identifying if we have an internal response team in-house, or we can outsource it to the vendors or contractors. And the preparation phase is not static. As you can see here, that with the diagram this phase will receive the input from the post-incident activity, which is the documentations of the previously happened incidents, and we will use those documentations as a database on the platform, and we can use that as role models or reference for the future incidents. The detection and containment phases could have multiple interactions within the same incident, because after we detecting a indication of attack, and after we detect the culprit, we will put it into containment, and after containment, we will continue to find out if they have any further actors behind the scenes, behind the scheme, and we put everything into containment, and it will. Moving on, there's a loop behind it. Once the loop is over, you will move on to the post-incident activity phase. And now, after we discuss about the incident report, the incident response, and how to put together a team, now let's talk about how to handling an incident. In order to detect a threat, your detection system must be working and must be able to identify the attack vectors and be able to dynamically learn more about new threats and new behaviors. Even with the user being diligent by closely watching for suspicious activities, and with sensors configured to send alerts whenever an attempt to compromise is detected. The most challenging part of an incident response process is still the accuracy of detecting what is truly a security threat. And then the user should be aware of the different type of attack and learn to manually create an incident ticket to address such behavior. And everything must be done in compliance with the company's policy. In this example, we have many indications of compromise, and then we put all the pieces together. We can validate the attack. Keep in mind that on the level of information you are collecting in each one of those phases and how conclusive it is, you may have the evidence of compromise, but you will also have the evidence of an attack. So as we can see here, this is a necessity of multiple logs in identifying an attacker's ultimate intent. As you can see, there are many security controls in place that can help to determine the indication of compromise. However, pulling them all together in an attack timeline and cross-referencing the data can be even more powerful. According to the scenarios we first discussed in the presentation, a user opened a suspicious email, and then the hacker gained the control of the system, then begins to move to do the lateral movement, and later on compromise the data in the server. So by using the multiple logs, we can help identify the attack vectors and the attacker's ultimate intent. For the first and second phase, the endpoint protection and the operating system logs can help determine the IOC, which is the indication of compromise. And for this one, the phishing email and lateral movement followed by the privilege escalation can be performed by the attackers. For the third phase, the server logs and network captures can help determine the indication of compromise, usually solved by the unauthorized or malicious processes could read or modify the data. For the last one, assuming there is a firewall in between the cloud and on-premises resources, the firewall log and the network capture can help determine the indication of compromise, the data extraction and submission to command and control. The detections are becoming one of the most important security controls for a company. The sensors placed across the premises and in the cloud. A growing trend is to leverage security intelligence and advanced analytics to detect threats more quickly and reduce false positives. This can save time and enhance the overall security. Once the incident is detected and confirmed as a true positive, you need to either collect more data to or analyze what you already have. If this is an ongoing issue where the attack is taking place, you need to obtain live data from the attack and then quickly provide the remediation to stop the attack. For this reason, detection and analysis are sometimes done almost at the same time. Moving on with the post-incident activity. For this incident activity, we're gonna discuss about a real-world scenario. On May 12, 2017, some users called the help desk that they were receiving the following scenes, which is you can see here on the slide, that is the WannaCry ransomware, one of the worst and the devastating effect of a ransomware ever happened in the human history. And some users called the help desk that they were receiving the following scenes after the initial assessment and the confirmation of the issue. The security team was engaged and the incident ticket was created. Since many systems experienced the same issue, the security team escalated the incident to high severity, which is after identifying that was the ransomware attack, the team applied the MS-17003 patch to prevent more systems from getting infected with this ransomware. At this point, the incident response team was working on 3 fronts. First one is to break the ransomware encryption. The second team will work on to identify other systems vulnerable if they are vulnerable to this type of attack. And the last team will work on to communicate the issue to the press. The incident response team worked with the anti-malware vendor to break the encryption and gain access to the data again. At this point, all other systems were patched and running without any problems. So this concluded the containment, eradication, and recovering phase. So what lessons is learned here? An incident is not finished when the issue is resolved. In fact, this is just the beginning of a whole different level of work that needs to be done at every single incident, the documentation of the lessons learned. One of the most valuable pieces of information that you have in the post-incident activity phase is the lessons learned. This will help you to refine the process through the through the identification of gaps in the process and areas of movement. When incident is fully closed, if it must be documented. If this documentation must be fully detailed with the full time of the incident, the steps were taken to resolve the problem, what happened during each step, and how the issue was finally resolved. And the documentation will be used as a base to answer the following questions. The first one is, who identified the security issue? Is that the user or the detection system? Was the incident opened with the right priority? Did the security operations team perform the initial assessment correctly? Or is there any could be improved at this point? And was the data analysis done correctly? Was the containment done correctly? Is there anything that could be improved at this point? And how long did it take to resolve this incident? To answer these questions, we'll help to refine the incident response process, and we'll also enrich the incident database. The incident management system should have all the incidents fully documented and searchable. The goal is to create a knowledge base that can be used for future incidents, and oftentimes the incidents can be resolved by the same steps that were used in a similar previous incident. Another important process is evidence retention. All artifacts must be captured during the incident should be stored according to the company's retention policy. If the attackers need to be prosecuted, the evidence must be kept intact until legal actions are completely settled. And for that, that has already concluded my presentation for today. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. It's 3 a.m. in the morning.